Who do we got in here? We got a few people in here. Robert, Phil, Josh, Jessica, Jesse, Cliff, Mike. What's up, man? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and run it, and then they'll catch the recording after I post it afterwards. I am going to be posting the recording. So some of you have heard about these 12 stories before. What's going on, Charles? I just saw you. No worries, because I'm going to go a little bit deeper, so you're still going to get something out of this. And I guarantee you, Cliff, the rest of you guys who have heard this before have forgotten half of it, maybe. So, so I'm going to go through it again for the benefit of everybody here and my audience, because I love doing this stuff. So, all right, how many of you have heard of the origin story before? Yep. Anybody? Just say yeah. Okay. So the origin story is much like the hero's journey made popular by Expert Secrets, right? And I'm gonna break down my way of crafting that origin story, which is a little bit different from what everybody else is doing. I'm gonna show you guys that and go deep into the psychology of why it works. Okay, understand that all of these stories of feeling belief is all created through a release in brain chemicals. You've got cortisol, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, yada, yada, right? We're going to go through those. I'm going to talk to you about what they mean in each one of these stories. But let's get into the 12 stories. So I'm going to give you an overview of the 12 first. The inside of this tower is and are the corresponding emotional activators triggered by the story, right? So the first story, again, I'm going to overview, and then I'll go through each one individually and tell you what they are. So the first story is an origin story, right? Fun one. Basically, that is your journey. It's your story of your past, and then you experiencing some horrible event or failure, have an epiphany, and it's all about the creation of the method, basically, right? We talk about selling methods, not selling products, not selling pieces. You're selling a method. So, and I'm going to expand on that in a second. So origin story, then you've got an ability story. Okay. Ability story is a story about a time that you didn't have the tools or resources to make something happen. Okay. And you felt down about it, but you were able to make something happen anyways, right? You sucked it up. You basically overcame that false belief that you couldn't do it, and you did it. So it's all about not having tools, not having resources. You're able to make something happen anyways. Real quick example of that, right, is, remember I said that each one of these stories can be found in the Bible, Torah, Quran, all the major religious books. If you think about the story of like David and Goliath, the walls of Jericho, those are all ability stories. And then they can be tied to another type of story, historical story, such that like Russell Brunson in his presentations, he uses the 4-minute mile story. So the 4-minute mile is also an ability story. The Edmund Hillary story of Mount Everest is an ability story. So Edmund Hillary was the first person to conquer Everest. There have been 40 or so expeditions before he was able to conquer Everest. Everybody failed. Nobody thought it was possible. Edmund Hillary basically conquered Everest. And after that, there were 100 or so people who also conquered Everest because they had belief, right? So it gives people confidence. The ability story does, confidence in the fact that they can actually make it happen for themselves. Okay. Morality story. A morality story is a story about a time that it does not benefit you to do the right thing, but you do it anyways. And as a result, right, basically you're doing it for the greater good. It doesn't benefit you. It gives the buyer a sense of trust. It communicates that you are a person of integrity, right? Now, here's the thing about some of these stories, right? Because I know some of you are thinking, okay, how can I apply this to my product? How can I apply this to my offer? How can I apply this to my service that I sell? Not all of these stories have to even be talking about your offer, product, or service. Some of these stories have a specific purpose, and that specific purpose is a feeling that has nothing to do with your offer, product, or service, like trust, right? Trust has everything to do with you. It has nothing to do with your product, okay? So let's say big time, though, most of you are in the coaching space, or you involved in the coaching space selling information products, trust has less to do with the product itself and more to do with the person, okay? So you're selling them on the belief in the person, and we'll talk about, I don't know how many of you are Star Wars fans, but C-3PO, I've got a C-3PO method of creating belief, and we're going to talk about the different things that someone has to believe in, and I'll show you that in just a second, but trust is one of them. Morality story, like I said, is a story about a time that it didn't benefit you to do the right thing, but you did it anyways. And as a result, you are then known as a person that they can trust. Okay. And let me just tell you something. Randomly in the sales process, on a webinar, okay, usually on a webinar, in a challenge, day 2, 3 of the challenge, I throw in a morality story of a time that I did something for somebody. Maybe it was a favor for them, or maybe it was something that they needed help with that you didn't want to do, but you did it because it was for the greater good, blah, blah, blah. It communicates immediately to the person listening, hey, this guy is somebody who's going to do what's right no matter what. Therefore, he's probably not going to do me wrong, right? So it can just be a story about, a friend, or it can be a story about even, one of my favorite ones that tells a story about an enemy, right? Somebody who I considered to be an enemy. It didn't benefit me to help them, and I did it anyways because they needed the help, right? So morality story is powerful, powerful, powerful. This is a whole lot different, guys, than you saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to need you to trust me, right? If you're communicating to a buyer in a webinar situation or on a call, and you say, hey, just trust me, major red flag, right? They're going to be like, yeah, now I'm not going to trust you because you told me to trust you. But if you, let's say, sneakily tell a morality story, then it creates trust anyways. You get where I'm going with that? So the next one, right, that communicates security is a plan B story. No, not the pill, right? Plan B story is a story about a time that something went horribly wrong. Okay, something happened, went horribly wrong. You had a backup plan to save the day. It communicates that you are a person that always has a plan B, that you are a person that is going to make it happen no matter what, right? And that they can trust and have security in the fact, right, that you're going to be able to do it. And it also eliminates a lot of objections, okay? Because most of your objections that they're going to have, your buyer's going to have, are going to be, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? What if that happens? But if you have established early on that you're a plan B kind of guy or girl, you're the person that has the backup plan, then they're going to trust that anything they're worried about is going to be taken care of because there's always a fail safe. Make sense? Now, the next ones are fun. These are for validation. One of them is a historical story. Historical story is something about the past that relates to what you're doing in the future to validate what you're doing in the future. The reason this is important is there are a couple different ways to validate. You got validation through association, which is the next story. That's the Meet the Guru story. And then the historical story. Basically, I use these all the time because there are a couple of things that most people don't argue with. Most people don't argue with something that's written in the history books. I understand there are things in history that people do argue, okay? But for the most part, if it's historical record, if it happened and it's been, told for years and years and years that it's happened, we're programmed since the time that we're children to believe certain things in history. But if it's historical record, it is perceived to be true. When we tie the perception of truth from the past to what we're doing in the future, what we're doing in the future is also perceived to be true because it's related, okay? Now, the second form of validation that's powerful is Meet the Guru story. And a Meet the Guru story is used very, very often. In the Bible, it's pretty much every single story in red letters, right? Every single story that involves somebody talking to Jesus Christ and he is telling them this or teaching them this and they're passing it on, right? That's a Meet the Guru story. Meet the Guru story is a story about a time, and I understand that not everybody, is talking to Jesus, but my point there is it's about a time that you met somebody of higher importance or higher authority, and they passed that knowledge down to you. They gave you knowledge, passed it to you, and you are now going to give it to somebody else. That is important because if I tell you something, you can object to it. But if I tell you that Einstein said it, or if I tell you that Tony Robbins said it, or if I tell you that Agora Publishing, which by the way, Russell also uses this when he's speaking on stage a lot. He mentions Agora Publishing. He mentions, Marcus Lemonis, Tony Robbins. He's throwing out these authority figures because what he's doing is borrowing validation from those people who are higher, equal authority, whatever. The idea here is that it doesn't have to be a monk in a temple that you go meet. It doesn't have to be Jesus. It doesn't have to be, somebody who is like world renowned. It could be somebody that you look up to. It could be a grandfather that told you something. Most people relate to family oriented stuff. They relate to being taught lessons by their grandfather. It could be a boss that taught you something. It could be a mentor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want to identify and use this, by the way, not just once, several times in your sales process. And the number one question that I get when I'm talking about a Meet the Guru story is people say, well, doesn't that steal from your authority, right? Doesn't that take people away from you and want them to buy that other person's stuff? Okay, but there's a way that you structure that story so that that does not happen. You tell the story of how you met with somebody and they led you to a discovery, to an aha moment, to an epiphany, where you took their knowledge, changed it, modified it, made it better. You added your experience to it. So what's important with the Meet the Guru story is that you take the information, add your experience to it, right? And now you've created something that's going to help them because it's been battle tested and proven. Got it? So 2 forms of validation. There are actually 3. The other one is obviously testimonials, a social proof. It's down at the bottom. But that's for a different reason. That's for altruism. And we'll talk about that in a second. That's to get people to believe in what we call the cause, the movement, right? You're getting them to believe in the cause of the movement through stories of others who are involved in that movement. Okay. But historical story, again, as a good example that I use all the time, if I was selling like wrestling or ground and pounder MMA, right? Most people or most men would not consider it very macho or cool to roll around on the mat and get sweaty with another dude. However, if you bring in stories of how the Romans used to wrestle lions in the Colosseum, now wrestling becomes cool. Okay, it's a historical story. Or how the samurai used this grappling technique to overcome their opponents when they drop their sword, right? Now it becomes a cool thing. Now it becomes a macho thing that everybody wants to learn. You get what I'm going with that? So it could also simply, historical story could be something about your past as well, right? Because your past is history, okay? Now, most people will believe it more if it's something that's further back in history, okay? A good example is when I teach offer creation. When I teach offer creation, I talk about Adam Lasker, I talk about the theory of value, I talk about, in the 1700s, people believed that value was based on the time the time and effort that you put into something. And then in the 1800s, Adam Smith actually released the theory of value that says that it's actually in the eyes of the buyer and how they perceive the positive influence that your product or service has on their life or in their business. So that's an example. I pull up historical reference of to sell the idea that value is not time and effort, value is perception. Right? So when I'm teaching offer creation and I talk about an offer being a product plus value added, what is value? Value is perception. Value is not time and effort, right? So I do that by introducing a historical story to validate my point, right? So it's about validating the point that you're trying to make. And oftentimes the point that we're trying to make, the statement we're trying to get them to believe in, is embedded in the story. And we're going to talk about embedded stuff in a little bit, but we embed statements and points that we're trying to make in the story so that they will believe them, because people argue with statements. They do not argue with story, right? If I tell you, here's the thing that you need to know about an offer. An offer is product plus value added, and value is not time and effort. Okay. Value is perception. People are going to be like, okay, I disagree. I agree. I disagree. But if you tell the story and you back it up with validation, now they're like, okay, I believe that, right? The other reason people don't argue with Meet the Guru stories is because, and this is a technique that's used often in NLP, that's used in subconscious selling, subconscious reprogramming by therapists, et cetera. They make points or tell stories in third person because you can argue with the person that's in front of you, but you cannot argue with the person that's not present, right? So if I tell you a Meet the Guru story, and I say, I met Eric, okay? And Eric taught me this, this, this. And one thing that Eric said, or he said all the time, was blank, blank, blank. So that blank, 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 that statement that I want you to believe, if I tell you that it was told to me by Eric and Eric is a higher authority, then you believe it and you can't argue with Eric because Eric's not present, right? But if I put him on a pedestal as being a higher authority and I say, he taught me this, he gave me this information. So think about the statements that you're trying to make to people and tell them in the form of story through third person dialogue, right? That's a very interesting technique that you'll see a lot of people do. I mean, you see pastors doing it, right? You see pastors, preachers, Great motivational speakers like Les Brown, et cetera. They do this all the time, right? That sticky statement, we call it, that quotable moment, that one thing that they say that's like, oh, that's good. I need to write that down in my notes. Every time they do that, that note or that quote is coming from the mouth of the authority that they present in the Meet the Guru story, and it hits. And it's so effective. And people are like, oh, if they said that, I need to write that down, because if it changed his life, it's going to change my life. Get where I'm going with that? So quotes are short form validation through association. They're essentially the most confined form of a Meet the Guru statement or story that you could possibly have, is borrowing a quote. If I say that, Einstein said, the thinking that got you to where you are is not going to be the same thinking that gets you to where you're going, right? That's an overused quote, and it can be cliche, but it's true. But because I said Einstein said it, you believe it. And now I'm going to follow up whatever quote I used, what statement I used for validation, I'm going to follow that up with a point that sounds similar, so that what I'm saying is perceived to be true because the quote that they believe is a known truth. Make sense? So historical, Meet the Guru. Then we get into some fun stuff. We've got a story here that communicates the reward is greater than the risk, okay? And that is an adventure story. So an adventure story is a story about a time when you are scared shitless to do something. You are afraid. You're afraid of what might happen. There's fear, there's doubt, there are all the emotions that somebody has when they're on the verge of doing something big. They're afraid of it, so they don't do it, right? An adventure story is a story about a time when you were afraid to do something and you did it anyways. And then guess what? It wasn't that scary and you got a reward, right? It's like the roller coaster thing. You're afraid of a roller coaster till you ride the damn thing. Then you want to go again and again and again and again, right? So adventure story, you can call the roller coaster. You build the tension. You talk about how you were afraid, all the fear, the doubt. By the way, all of those feelings relatable to the same fears and doubts that your buyer is having. So when you understand, I talk about psychographics all the time. When you understand the psychographics of the person that you're selling to, their likes, interests, behavior, opinions, attitudes, beliefs, pain points, problems, obstacles, and desires, those are all the psychographics. When you sit down and you map out a spreadsheet of all these things, okay, and you know what triggers them, because the psychographics are emotional activators, they're what trigger, right, a person to feel, to act. Again, remember, it's what they focus on. They focus on what they like. They focus on what they're interested in, what they believe. They focus on their pain, problems, obstacles, and desires, all those things they focus on. And like I said earlier, the focus in your head creates the feeling in your heart that creates the function in your hand. If the focus in your head is negative, the feeling in your heart is anxiety, and anxiety is the function of powerlessness. If the focus is positive, the feeling is anticipation. If you're anticipated or you anticipate something, you have power in your hand because you're excited to do it. How many times have you been anticipated something and you wake up super early and you're ready to go and nobody can tell you that you're not going to do it, right? You wake up with anticipation and not anxiety. You wake up with anxiety, you don't want to get out of bed. You're like, fuck this day, right? Like that's the feeling. So it's all shift in focus. And the purpose, I would say the number one main purpose of all these stories, right? Besides the belief and besides all these feelings of trust, security, confidence, hope, is to create or direct their focus. You're directing focus and you're distracting. You're using what we call positive distraction. Most people put a negative connotation on the word distraction, okay? But to distract means to redirect, and we are going to redirect them from the negative to the positive. So in a way, we're distracting them away from what they don't want and getting them to focus on what they do, right? So everybody says, I'm just too distracted. I'm too distracted. You are distracting yourself away from what's good towards what you don't need, instead of distracting yourself away. Because let's face it, the big fight that we're all fighting today is for attention. We are all fighting for attention, especially with the technology, with the phones, the mobile devices, everything we have. Everything is thrown in their face. Your reticular activating system is going crazy all day long. And we are fighting to get their attention away from all the things that are giving them little dopamine hits. And I talked earlier about, the brain chemicals, cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. I'm going to get into that with each one of these stories. But let me finish this first. I told you I go fast and I kind of rabbit hole a little bit, but It's all fun in the end. It's all good. So with urgency, okay, this is a regret story. Regret, my board's shaking a little bit here. Regret story. So a regret story is a story about a time. Now, it is not necessarily a story about something that you didn't do and you like a mistake that you made. It's like some people say, oh, regret, I get that. That's like a mistake that I made, but it's not, right? It is there to communicate urgency, but also envy, right? So an emotional activator, so envy is a motivator, right? It's an emotional activator. You got positive gain, you got greed, you got envy, right? So that's the whole, keeping up with the Joneses thing. If the neighbors are doing it, I got to be doing it too, kind of thing. Now, a regret story is a story about a time that you had an opportunity to do something and you didn't do it. And what happened was you saw somebody close to you win because they did, right? So it's a story about a time that you had an opportunity you didn't take, but somebody did, and you had to watch them win, right? So the way that the regret story works is it communicates that you are jealous or envious of the other person that got the win and you didn't get the win, right? So you're going to tell a story about that, right? Very similar to like when I had the opportunity way back in the day to buy Bitcoin at a really cheap price and I didn't, and my buddy did, and he blew the hell up, when Bitcoin shot up, right? I'm not a big advocate of crypto now, but in the past, I wish I had done that at the time that I was offered to do it, and I would have made a good chunk of money off of it. Now, obviously, if you're not selling crypto, then that story does not apply, but it's just an example of what a regret story is. So think about what you are selling. It could be something that you have finally done now that you regret not doing 6 months ago when you saw other people doing it 6 months ago, because those other people are way further ahead than you are now, right? That's a form of regret story too, okay? Then we get into communicating OBC. OBC is the obvious better choice. So you're communicating the obvious better choice with a this versus that story. This versus that story is a story of two people that come from the same place with the same resources, similar place, similar resources. One person chooses to do the right thing, they get the reward. It's a reward and consequence frame, okay? Reward and consequence frame. Okay, the story is meant to communicate that working with you or taking you up on your offer or your product or your service leads to the reward, and the other person who did not do it, consequence. Seems pretty simple, right? But here's how you close this out. This versus that story is powerful. If you ask them the right question at the end of that story, you tell the story of two people, John and Mark, that came from the same place, had the same tools, resources. Doesn't work if you say one was rich and one was poor, because everybody's going to expect the rich guy to win, okay? But if they have similar resources, come from the same place, they both get an opportunity. One decides to work with you, one does not, okay? John is now very successful in his business. Mark is still struggling at his full-time job. Okay, at the end, you ask them, and let me ask you a question. Which type of person would you rather be? Okay, would you rather be a John or a Mark? And then oftentimes, this is my bridge into the testimonials that we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay, and it's the perfect bridge into testimonials because you tell the story of, as an example, John and Mark. You say, now, who would you rather be, John or Mark? And psychologically, they don't want to admit to be the person that lost. So they want to be the person that got the reward. So they say, I'd rather be a John. And then you say, well, let me show you some other people who chose to be a John. Right? Testimonial, testimonial, testimonial. You see how that happens? You got a bridge right into your testimonials with this versus that story. Okay. Now you've got two stories coming up, victory and reward. And I'm going to tell you that they sound the same, but I'm going to tell you the difference between the two, right? A victory story is about goals and achieving goals, okay? What is important to note about the victory story is that some people mess this story up by telling a story of a goal that is so far-fetched to the person that's listening that they don't believe it. It has to be believable. Therefore, for victory stories, we use what's called micro goals. Everybody's familiar with micro and macro, right? They're opposites of each other. One means small, one means big, okay? If you talk about a macro goal, let's say if I tell you a victory story of how I made $20 million, That's not going to relate to every single person who's listening to me, who's just starting, okay? Because that goal seems too far out of reach, okay? You guys familiar with micro goal setting? We talk about this a lot in business, by the way, micro goal setting, when we break down our OKRs, right? Our OKRs. OKRs, if you're not familiar, are objectives and key results. And in a business structure, we set micro goals on a company level, on a management level, on a team member level, and then on a personal level. And I make my entire team set these OKRs, right? So I say, okay, these are our overall company goals, okay? Now my managers have their own goals, okay, that are met when their teams that they manage meet their goals, and then the team members individually have their goals and their own personal goals, okay? So when the team members meet their personal goals, the team meets the management goals. When the management goals are met, the company goals are met. Make sense? So I get minute in my micro goal setting all the way down to the personal level, and it's kind of like a chart or a pyramid, you know, and you just map it out. Like, what are our main company goals? Okay, how do we break that down? OKRs are often done also in the digital world, in the ads manager, right? You're looking at opt-ins, leads, conversions. You're getting micro, right? And but it can also be done, you know, doesn't have to be like data goals. It can be sales goals, it can be personal goals, life goals, etc. That's just as a side note, but I just wanted to, you know, talk about the difference between micro, macro goal setting, because the victory story is a story about a time when you had your first goal, right? That first goalpost that you were trying to reach, that first breakthrough, that first small goal. Let's say your first $10,000 or your first $5,000, or it could be higher than that, you know. But a victory story is a story about a small win. Okay. And I always follow that up with principle. When I tell a victory story and I'm talking about goals, I always follow it up with this principle. And the principle is this: a long obedience of small wins in a single direction lead to big wins. Okay. A long obedience of small wins in a single direction lead to big wins. So whenever I tell a victory story, I always follow up with that principle. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Right? But it's just for them to understand the idea of a goal and what having a goal means. Okay. Then the reward story here is less about goals and winning and more about elevation of status. Elevation of status is also one of the basic human needs, right? The need to be accepted, the feeling of acceptance. And that is triggered by a reward story. Reward story is a story about a time that you accomplished something, and as a result, you were celebrated by others, right? The time when you walked on stage to receive a 2 Comma Club award, or the time that you were celebrated by your family and friends. That's another big one. Some people, especially in the online space, we lock ourselves in these caves in our rooms, and we get to working, and we're always on the computers, and we're like introverted as hell, right? And some people, if you're like me, are very disconnected from most of their family. I'm very disconnected from most of my family, and I don't get a lot of opportunity, you know, to spend time with them. So anytime that I can make them proud with what I do, unfortunately, not much of what I do makes them proud because they're like so damn stubborn, but that's just on some personal shit. But the idea here is, let's say that you are the black sheep of your family and you're able to accomplish something. You got a little money, you do something great for your family, you win back their good graces. You are celebrated now by your family, by your loved ones, by the people that you care about. So there are 2 ways to spin this, okay? Because some people are motivated monetarily by money and other people are motivated by impact and feeling in family, right? So if you know that the person you're talking to, for example, if I'm on a sales call with somebody and I go through situation awareness, problem awareness, consequence awareness, and they start telling me with the questions that I'm asking them that they are having issues with their family, then the story that I tell, the reward story that I tell in that sales call or on that sales call, I know that I have to tell a reward story related to winning back the good graces of family and friends, right? Because that's going to relate to that person more than monetary gain will. But if I know that that person is all about, I just want to make money as much as possible, I want to be a gazillionaire, right? Then I'm going to tell them a reward story of like a time that I was celebrated by 5,000 people in a room for accomplishing something, for making $1 million, for making $10 million, right? That's the kind of reward story that I'm going to tell because it resonates with that person based on what they've already told me they were more interested in. Make sense? And then the testimonials are for altruism, right? The testimonials here are all about creating a movement. There's social proof, yes. So it is a form of validation, like I said, but it is more about the greater good, getting them to believe in the cause. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through a little bit of this. Guys, this is going to be recorded, but take a picture of this if you need to take a picture of this. Before I move on to some stuff with each one of these, does anybody have any questions on this overview right here? We can go ahead and turn the mics on and let them unmute themselves and ask any questions about this story tower. How we doing so far?
Awesome, man. This has been fire. I love it.
Absolutely. Totally awesome.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Nobody has any questions on this. I'm sure they'll get the replay and be able to go back through it. Or was there a question? Mike Dennis just says in my note already. On point, indeed. You got one tonight. We all got those personal stories. Replay. I'm just going through the chat. Sorry, I was firing away. Didn't have time to hop on this. Okay. Sweet. Cool. All right. Let's get into some good. You ready? Believe it or not, this was not the good. This is just the overview. Okay. So I'm going to erase this. Let's get it going. All right. You guys ready for more? Give me a yeah if you're ready for some more here.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's get it. All right. So each one of these stories to create belief, let's talk about what actually is needed to create belief. Okay. So remember I said earlier, C3PO, like the little guy, the little robot guy, right? There are certain things that they have to believe in. C3PO. It is, right? 1 C, 3 P's, and 3 O's. So I should do this. Like, I guess that's correct. Like a math equation, right? It would be 3 times P, 3 times O, but not C if that looks anything like it's supposed to. But C3PO is a method that I use to create a belief chain. Now, what the hell are the C, 3, P, and the O's? Okay. They have to believe in the cause. Okay. They have to believe in the person. They have to believe in the problem, the process. Okay. Then we get into the O's. They have to believe in the opportunity. They have to believe in the outcome. Right? And then they have to believe in the offer. Now, what the hell does all this mean? Okay. For them to believe in the cause, you have to show them that other people are a part of it, right? You're selling them on the movement. This idea that if they follow suit, if they be, I don't want to say sheep because everybody's like, I don't want to be a sheep, but if they're going to fall in line with what everybody else is doing, right? You want them to move in the direction that everybody else is moving in. You have to show them that everybody else is moving in that direction, right? You have to show them that everybody who is joining, making it happen is getting results. Okay. There are a lot of people in the newsfeed that are just blasting results all day long. And that's all they do is just show win. And they're making sales. And nothing against the guys that are doing that. There's no meat or principle to that, right? I believe in coaching on all 4 levels of strategy, of tactic, strategy, principle, and essence. So tactic, strategy, principle, and essence, like posting screenshots of wins all day long is a tactic, okay? But you're not really getting into principle and essence when you do that. So, but it is absolutely necessary for them to believe in the movement. They have to believe in the cause, right? So the cause here being, okay, the greater good, the reason why you do it. This is where a lot of your values come into play. So there's 2 parts of this, right? There's your personal values, right? And belief. People do business with other people who believe the same things they do. So 9 times out of 10, when I'm talking to somebody for the first time, I don't tell them what I think. I tell them what I believe, because belief is deeper seated, right? If I tell them what I think, they say, that's an opinion. That's your opinion, may not be mine. But if I say, let me tell you something, I believe this, this, and this. If you start a conversation with that, and this also, again, I'm going to side rail, but this is important for you to know, okay? I follow a system, like, let's say that you were on a plane, right? And you're talking to somebody and you got 60 seconds, right? To explain to them, and somebody says, what do you do? Right? So instead of going into this long-winded pitch of like, you know, what you do and what it's done and all this stuff, there's a sort, like a small or short breakdown that you can use every single time to get people's attention. And it is this: you tell them what you believe, right? What you believe, why you believe it, because you believe it, this is what you do. And then you talk about who you've done it for, right? So what you believe, why you believe it, because you believe it, this is what you do. And then you talk about what it's done for others. Okay, very short. But leading with belief is 1,000 times more powerful, right, than telling people what you think or talking about your opinion, right? Like if you step out on a stage and you say, I believe that every person in this room has the ability to make money above and beyond the money that they're making in their business by selling the knowledge and information of how they got to where they are in the first place, right? If I communicate that belief, then what happens is immediately, right, it separates the room. It separates the room from the people who believe the same things you do and the people that don't. And when you start communicating your beliefs in the sales process, let's say in your ads, right? You step out, you run a cold ad for the first time, you're talking about what you believe. Because you believe it, this is what you're doing, right? If you communicate belief in the very beginning, it separates, what do they say? It separates the men from the boys, right? Like everybody who believes the same thing, they're immediately going to be attracted to what you're saying. You know, how many times have you heard somebody, you know, talking about their beliefs? And let's just say, you know, I'm not into politics a whole lot, but, you know, political beliefs, right? They start talking about something, you can tell right away whether that person is on the left or on the right. And the people who are, you know, on the left with them or on the right with them are going to blow up the comments, and you're going to attract all those people right away. So I'm not talking about being politically polarizing here. You don't have to be polarizing, but oftentimes if you communicate common beliefs, right, that every single person should believe, right, because it's moral or whatever, then you attract a lot more people. But you can also be specific with it. Now, some of the greatest causes or movements in the world have specific beliefs, right? They believe things a certain way specifically, and it's important that you communicate that we don't just believe this, we act on our belief. Because if you're trying to get somebody to act on that same belief, you have to show that you act on that belief as well. You got what I'm saying there? So they have to believe in the cause. So let's just put a note here for movement. Okay, so you're creating the movement. They have to believe in the person. Okay, now this is a big one, right? And I'm not saying, oh, they have to believe you, because if they don't believe you, they're not going to buy. I mean, that's very, very basic, okay, way of explaining it. But believing the person goes so much deeper, okay? Because we go back to psychographics, right? If you want to be a person that they believe in, or that they, I'm going to put a note here, aspire to be, okay, you have to have accomplished what they want to accomplish. You have to show them that you relate to them, right, on a personal level. So we go back to relatability here. For them to believe in the person, which is you, you have to be a mirror image of them, right? You have to be a mirror image of them, okay? There was a friend study that was done at Harvard some years back, and basically they got all these kids together, they put them in a room, and they gave them all like these friend profiles. And they said, here's your goal, right? Your goal is to make friends with somebody that is totally different from you, right? So they got everybody to write down what their likes, interests were, what their hobbies were, what they like doing, and then they swapped friend profiles, right? So there was this kid, I forgot his name, but let's just say, you know, Timmy, for example. So Timmy was he was from Detroit, right? City boy. He was supposed to make friends. The friend profile that he got was a kid from Kansas who liked to go mudding in his truck and liked to go fishing and hunting and all this stuff. Didn't relate anything to this kid. But the idea was he was supposed to take that friend profile, right? And then go meet this person, hang out with this person, and see if he could engineer a friendship, like become a real best friend in a short period of time with the friend profile that he received, right? So they taught them to have conversations only related to what that person liked doing, right? So again, ethical, unethical, whatever you want to call it, they got this friend profile. He meets up with the other kid and he's like, oh yeah, how about those Kansas City Chiefs, right? How about this? Like, I used to go out there to this lake. Like, literally, he would look up the area where the kid was from and start talking about the lake that was by his town or whatever. We're like, yeah, we used to go out on this lake. All of a sudden, it was like, 99% bullshit that he got from the friend profile. But through studying that, he understood the other person. And surprise, surprise, the lesson that can be learned from this is all he did when they met up was talk about things that that his new friend liked, wanted, right, was interested in. Okay, how do we pull anything from that little story about the friend test and the friend profile? Obviously, we don't get a friend profile on the person that we're trying to sell before we try to sell them, but we do know the person that we're trying to attract. Okay, and if we get that part right, if we get the part right of attracting the right person, okay, with the right messaging, you want a message that attracts the right person, repels the wrong person. If you understand their psychographics, you attract the right person, and 9 times out of 10, the person you're talking to is going to relate to what you're saying anyways, because the person you're trying to attract wants to hear this, relates to this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get where I'm going with this? So, and on a side note, when it comes to like manipulation, because some people the last time I told that story about the Harvard study, somebody said, oh, well, that's manipulation. If you lie about what you like and you lie and you that's like changing who you are. Not necessarily, right? Because in this situation, if we're attracting people who are like us, then it's not a lie, right? In that situation, it was because he was becoming somebody else, right? To make to make another person happy, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend you become somebody else to make the buyer happy. Okay, I recommend that you nail your messaging to attract the person that is like you so that you can be yourself and resonate with that person from the beginning, right? So selling belief in the person is all about understanding the psychographics, likes, interests, behavior, opinions, attitudes, belief, and crafting a message that is so relatable to the person that you are selling to that them denying your offer or your service would be like them denying themselves. So let me say that again. When your messaging is honed in on psychographics of the person that you want to attract and you're trying to sell, okay, it is so relatable. The stories that you tell are so relatable to their life, okay, that them denying your offer at the end would be like them having to deny themselves, right? How powerful is that? How powerful is that when you learn to understand the person you want to sell to well enough to tell a story that they could not deny, right? That they would have to say, this is so me, I want to go do this, right? I have to do this. This is me. I've been through that. I've felt that. I've experienced that. This is everything that I know I've ever wanted, right? I have to do it. Remember, I said earlier, I'm going to show you through this how to inner engineer a person to believe whatever it is that you want them to believe and feel like they are doing it for their reasons, right? People do things because they feel like it, but you can create that feeling, okay? So they believe in the cause, they believe in the person that they aspire to be, that is you, that is also any character that you put into your story, which, by the way, the story, if I break it down, I'll break it down here at the bottom if you can see it. Every story has a character, okay? It has context, has conflict, and it has creation. 4 C's. 4 C's of effective storytelling: character, context, conflict, and creation, okay? The character in the story is always, 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 whether it's you or whether it's a student of yours or whether it's a previous customer of yours, right? The character is always going to relate to the buyer, okay? It's going to relate to the person that you're selling, directly related to. If it doesn't sound like them, if it doesn't feel like them, they're not going to relate to it. So the context are all the details in the story that surround what the character does that validate what the character is doing. Okay. I'll give you an example. You guys, some of you may have heard the fake book story, but I'm going to tell you the fake book story. So I was sitting at a Starbucks and I was sitting there drinking a mocha frappuccino because I like those, you know, they're not the healthiest drink, but I love the mocha frappuccinos. Anyways, I'm sitting there drinking a mocha frappuccino with my laptop open at a table. I'm getting a webinar done. I'm working on a webinar. And there's these two young guys next to me, and they're like kids, they're like 19, 20, and they're talking about how they just made 100 grand in their business. And I kind of chuckle and laugh at it because I remember being in that spot, right? I remember my first 100K, and I remember the feeling, and they've got a long way to go to get to where they're trying to be. So I was kind of like listening to them a little bit and laughing. And then I look outside, Bugatti pulls up. Now you don't see a freaking Bugatti every single day. So it caught my attention, right? So I'm not easily distracted by dumb shit, but I see a Bugatti pull up outside. I think it was a Chiron, and you don't see those everywhere. So this old guy gets out. He's like, gotta be like 78, 76, 78 years old. And I'm thinking in my head, like, obviously got a nice retirement check, you know, spent his retirement check on a car that he's too old to really enjoy. I'm like, if I had that car, I would enjoy the hell out of it. Now, I do have a Ferrari. It's not a Bugatti, far from a Bugatti. I'm not at that level. Well, technically I could buy one, but I just, you know, don't consider myself at that level yet, but I definitely am. That's just me being humble. But anyways, car pulls up, old guy gets out, he comes inside and he's sitting down next to these young kids and he starts like mentoring them. He starts talking about it. And they said something that made my ears perk up. He says, yeah, we sold the company for $1 billion and we were doing over $100 million a year. Now that caught my attention because I'm not doing $100 million a year, right? I don't have $1 billion valuation. You know, in fact, in the coaching business, I don't even have an exit strategy because if I sell my coaching business, I'm selling me, right? And if I'm not there to coach, nobody's gonna buy a coaching business without me there to coach, you know? So this perked up and caught my interest conversation, and I leaned over and I said, let me ask you a question to the older guy. I said, what is one thing that you did every single day, right, without fail, that helped you, or would you say is an important factor in how you got to where you're going? So he pulls out this notebook, and it's this really old notebook. It's about that thick, and it just looks all beat up, like years old, right? And he says, oh, here's what I did. Every day, right, I wrote down what I was doing that day, what I needed to do that I hadn't done yet that day, and then I took notes on what my competitors were doing that I was not doing. So every day, like clockwork, in this notebook, I wrote down what I did in detail, what I needed to do that I didn't do, and what my competitors were doing, okay? And so I'm thinking like, this is like, you know, 40, 50 years in this notebook of exact moves that he made, you know? And I asked him, I said, how much do you want for the notebook, right? And he kind of laughed. He said, it's not for sale, right? So I go back to working. I'm like, yeah, I didn't figure he would sell it to me, right? So I go back to working on my stuff. And about 40 minutes later, he gets done with these guys and he leans over and he goes, you know what, young man? He's like, it's not going to serve me like it used to. I want you to have it. And he hands me this damn notebook, right? Now, me being a marketer, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take this. I'm going to scan it. I'm going to give it out. You know, I'm going to sell it. I wasn't going to give it out. So I was speaking at an event in Texas, and I come out on stage and I tell the story of this notebook of how I got it. And I said, who here wants this notebook? And a bunch of hands, after I told them where I got it from, shot up in the air. And I said, who would pay me $1,000 for it? But every hand goes up. I said, who would give me $5,000 for it? A bunch of hands go up. I said, this is too hard. Who would give me the most money for this notebook, right? And this guy says, I'll give you 40. I'll give you 50. Somebody says, I'll give you 100 grand. And I said, sold, right? And I went to walk down with the notebook, and I walked up to this guy, and I said, there's something you need to know before I give you this notebook. And I opened it up, and I said, it is completely blank. There's nothing in it. There's nothing in it. He was going to pay me $100,000 for a blank notebook. Okay. Why? Why was he going to pay me $100,000 for a blank notebook? Because I told a story, which happens to be a Meet the Guru story, by the way. Okay. A powerful Meet the Guru story. And I assigned value to that thing, that notebook, even though it was blank. Okay. And that's unethical. I don't recommend selling products that do not exist. Like some people will pitch offers and pitch programs that they don't intend on fulfilling on, and that's a problem, right? So these persuasive powers can be used negatively, and I just want to make that very, very clear that I'm not saying to sell something that doesn't exist. But I instilled enough value in that notebook, in that thing, that somebody wanted to pay me $100,000 for it. Now, why did they believe my story? Okay. They believed my story, one, because I use validation through association to meet the guru story, but also because of the context. So now we're circling back to my point here. I'm landing the plane. Okay. Context. I used enough contextual validation points in my story that were known to be true, so that whatever I slipped in was perceived to be true. What do I mean by that? I told you I was at Starbucks. People know that's a real place, right? Validation point number one, that's context. Validation point number one. I told you I was drinking a mocha frappuccino. People know you drink mocha frappuccinos at Starbucks. Validation point number two. I told you I was sitting there with my laptop open and there was a meeting happening next to me. People have been in that scenario. They've seen that at Starbucks. They know people meet at Starbucks. They know people work at Starbucks. Contextual validation point number three. You ever play that game, Three Truths and what is it? Three Truths and a Lie? Or yeah, that's it, right? Or Two Truths and a Lie, right? Where you tell them two things that are true and one thing that's a lie, and they have to try to differentiate which is true and which is a lie. And it's the hardest game to play, and they cannot. They cannot pick out the thing that is true and the thing that is a lie, because when you have enough contextual validation points that are known to be true, whatever you slip into the story is perceived to be true. So I told you a story that's believable, and I even joked about it, and I talked about things that are true and feelings that I have, like the fact that I shouldn't be drinking a mocha frappuccino because it's unhealthy for you, right? I personalized it by adding my own opinions, my own thoughts, my own dialogue to it. So point is, when you tell a story that contains enough elements of contextual validation, anything you slip in, like that book having value, is perceived to be true, right? Was that a good example? Somebody say hell yeah. Somebody give me a shout for that one, because it basically communicates the idea that you could engineer a story to create belief in a person, in an object, in a thing, even though it's a blank book, right? And get people to want to pay for it because they in their mind have assigned value to it based on the story that you have told. Now, had I not told that story and I just said, if I just came up to you with a book and I said, hey, I got this book from a billionaire, how much would you give me for it? It would be almost useless, because they don't know, I've assigned no value to it with my story, right? There's no context. Okay. So character, context, conflict is the problem in the story. So you create a problem, right? It is 10 times out of 10 related to the buyer's problems, obstacles, right? Pain, etc. Buyer's problems. Okay. Then you've got the creation. Creation is always the method that you've created to solve the problem, right? The service that you offer to solve it. The creation is basically your product or service or your offer, right? Now we sell the method. I said that earlier. We sell a method that, basically to carry out that method or to act on that method, you need our product. So we sell the method and belief in the method so that our offer becomes the vehicle in the way that they carry out that method. So character, context, conflict, and creation. I'm going to check the comments real quick and see what people are saying, because let's see. Bum, 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 bum. How am I doing so far? When you helped me write the VSL, I didn't really understand all of what you were telling me, but after watching the finished video and hearing you breaking it down again, I now understand what you were saying. Elevator pitch. Fire, 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 fire. Joined a little late, but this is fire. Sweet, freaking outstanding. Okay. Anybody want some more? Let's keep going.
Let's go.
Killing it, brother.
All right, let's keep going. Here we go.
Do it.
So back to the stories. Let's go back to the stories for a second, and let's talk about, okay, the origin story. Okay. So I'm going to erase this, and I am going to break down for you how I tell an origin story to maximize my results with it. So first thing I do in an origin story, now most people do what when they tell a story? They start from the beginning, right? So they'll start from where they started in the origin story. A lot of times they'll talk about, when they first started out in this business, or they were, doing something else and that led them to this business. But here's what we do 9 times out of 10. Are you familiar with, a lot of you are, producing content on TikTok, short form content, on stories and reels and all that stuff. What do you have in the beginning? You have a hook, right? So you have a hook in the beginning. A lot of times you're talking about a pain point, or you say something extreme in the beginning to hook their attention, because hooks hurt to get their attention. So you have to have a hook in the beginning of the story. But here's how we do it. So an origin story, right? When I write one or when I tell one, I always open up at the point of failure, right? So I open up by hooking them with a failure. So one is hook them, and I'll explain that in a second, with a failure, okay? Now, as an example, if in my story there was a tragic accident that happens, and let's say that, I got in a van and the driver fell asleep and I hit a tree, which happened, by the way, and I broke my nose, and my nose has still got a little bump there. And they say they can fix it, but they got to break it again. I'm like, hell no, not letting you break my nose again. But, I'm just a baby on that. Anyways, if I open up that story and the very first line of my story is, I woke up, there was blood all over my shirt, right? I looked beside me and there was a massive tree trunk about 3 inches away from my side, from my thigh. Okay. If I open up my story in the middle of the shit, right in the middle of the shit, then you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? That's your reaction, right? So you open up the story actually with you at your lowest point, and then you flash back to tell them how it started, right? So instead of starting a story from the beginning, beginnings are boring, right? You ever watch a show and the first few episodes, it's bullshit because they're trying to establish who the characters are. And then 3rd episode, 4th episode in, it starts getting good, starts getting to the action, starts getting to everything that you want to see that keeps you watching. A lot of people drop off of watching series because the first couple episodes are boring, right? So do not start your origin story from the beginning. Start it by talking about you at your lowest point. So hook them with a failure. It's you at lowest point. Now, if you open your story up with how you felt at your lowest point, people are going to say, oh my gosh, what happened? Then number 2, flashback. You back up and tell the story from the beginning. Okay, from the beginning. Okay, now this does 2 things. When you hook them with a failure in the beginning, you open up at the craziest moment. You're talking about how you felt. All this chaos is going on. It releases cortisol in the brain. Cortisol is the attention chemical. The attention chemical that tells your brain, releases cortisol to tell the brain what to pay attention to. It tells your reticular activating system, oh, this is important. Pay attention to this, right? So cortisol is the attention chemical. Okay, remember I said we're fighting for attention. So you start with you in the chaos, or at your lowest point, you open up with the failure, then you flashback, tell from the beginning. Now, this is what's called a dopamine build, right? Dopamine build. Because dopamine, the release of dopamine is related to tension. Okay, some people relate it to excitement. It's actually not. There are 2 sides of dopamine, right? The feeling that you get right before something great happens, and the feeling that you get right before something horrible happens. Okay, so big event happens, something horrible happens. That's number 3. Big event, failure, horrible event happens. Okay, that's when they get that gas, that, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened to you, right? That's a dopamine release. Again, remember, there are 2 sides of dopamine. Okay, so you've got excitement and fear. Excitement and fear are brother and sister emotions. Okay, so that's dopamine hit. And then 4, immediately after you say that this happened, you talk about the feelings, how you felt during the horrible event, how you felt during the horrible event. Okay, and this, by the way, connects with relatable pain points like we talked about earlier, and releases another brain chemical, oxytocin. Oxytocin is the trust chemical, okay, in the brain. When they relate to the pain points, to the problem, right, to your feelings, releases oxytocin in the brain. And number 5 is the moment when you realized you had to change. This is your epiphany. This is the light bulb goes off. Everybody's familiar with that moment, right? So you felt so bad at this point in your life that you had come to the realization that you had to make a change. Epiphany. Things got to change. That seems pretty simple, right? But important to note here that if the change that you realize has to happen is not related to the change that they want, it doesn't land, right? So this change, I realize things got to change. I have to be able to do this. I have to get this right. I have to stop doing this. I had a realization that this is not the direction I wanted to go in. I wanted to go in this direction, but they have to relate to the change, right? And then 6, by the way, is but even then. So this is the part that most people miss. So most people will tell their story of how from the beginning, they'll talk about the horrible event or the failure, and they'll talk about how they felt, but then they'll go right into, after I realized I had to make a change, I made the change. It doesn't happen like that. So this is the divide right here where everybody screws up. Everybody goes straight from I realized I had to make a change to, and then I did this and that, and it was great, right? Life does not work that way. You don't realize that you want to make a change, and then all of a sudden, it's just all peaches and cream, right? What happens once you realize you have to make a change is you try this and you try that, still have problems, right? So try this, try that. Okay, now we're being real. I tried this and tried that, still had problems. Now, what is this and that you tried? This and that you tried is related to the other methods, the other programs that people have bought, right? So when you make a list of everything your competitors are teaching, right, the programs that they've learned from, chances are the people that you are selling to have gone through other programs. They've bought from your competitors, right? They've been burned by other people. So what I do in this part of the story is I take everything that they could possibly have been learning already, the methods that they may be familiar with, and I plug them in. And I say, I realized I had to make a change, but I tried this $7 course, and I tried buying this, and I tried this, and I worked with these people, and blah, 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 and still had obstacles, problems, and experienced pain from it. So in other words, what you're doing here is instilling familiarity. So people buy, by the way, at the crossroads of familiarity and surprise. If they are too familiar with it, there's nothing new about it, they don't want it. But if it's too surprising and it's too new, there's nothing familiar about it, they're scared of it, they don't want it either. Okay, so you got to be at the crossroads of familiarity and surprise. And what's familiar to them is what they've already been learning from other people. Okay, what they've already tried to do that didn't work. So the things in your story, after you have your epiphany moment that you tried to do, are going to be other methods, right? Working with other people. It's going to be products that they tried to buy from your competitors. It's going to be other methods that they've attempted, learning on YouTube, going through hours and hours of video, all this stuff that they've tried to do, because what happens here is you get what's called, well, again, it's oxytocin, right? You're building trust again, because they're relating to now the obstacles, the pain and the problems. Because when I tell you a story and I say, I realized I had to change, but I tried this course and this program, and I tried learning this and doing that, and it still didn't work for me, people are going to be like, oh, yeah, I've done that too. That's a shit program. Or, oh, yeah, I've tried that. Didn't work for me either. Instant relatability. So this is the part that people miss, because they're like, oh, I don't want to throw rocks at my competitors. Listen, here's the thing. You can be subtle about it. You don't have to say their name specifically, but people know things about those other programs. Like if I say $7 course, people who you're speaking to probably know that. Or if I say, oh, I tried an NEPQ type method of selling, which is, Jeremy Miner teaches NEPQ. It's his method. But if I talk about that and Socratic selling, which, by the way, I don't want to take a shot at him, but his entire NEPQ method was based on a book called Socratic Selling. And if you go through Socratic Selling and look at the pages, his dialogue is word for word from that book. from years ago. So basically he just made it new again, which is kind of funny. But look, here's the thing, nothing is new. Like all these principles that I'm teaching have been around for thousands of years. So in a way I do the same thing, but not word for word. That's a little ridiculous, right? So like I said, not to take a shot at him, but tried this, tried that are going to be related to all the methods that they have currently or may have already tried, right? You get where I'm going with that? So tried this, tried that, still had problems. If you're Cliff and you're in fitness, then you're going to talk about, in this part of the story, you're going to talk about all the diets that you've tried, right? All the different diets you've tried, all the yo-yo diets, fad diets. You're going to talk about the excessive gym exercise, everything that they've tried that doesn't work, because you're about to introduce what does work, okay? So it's important, because if people don't know that you know what they're doing, then they're still going to believe that what they're doing might work, okay? But let's say that I'm learning from a different program and I learn a different method of doing things, okay? And you try to tell me, right, that yours is better. If you didn't mention what I'm doing, I'm still going to think that what I'm doing might work. But if you tell the story and you mention you tried this and that, and I'm currently doing that, I'm going to be like, oh, well, he's saying that he tried that and it didn't work for him. So I'm assuming that whatever he's about to say next is going to be better than what I'm currently doing. Makes sense? So there's no familiarity. If they don't know that you can relate to where they're at, they're not going to believe in where you want them to be going. Okay. So the next part here is tried this, tried that, still had problems. 7, found the solution. Okay. We're not done yet. Most people stop here too. They say, oh, here's the solution. No. You talk about you found a solution, but you don't tell them what it is. Right? You discovered the solution. You tried this, tried that. Finally, you discovered a method that works. Don't tell them. Do not tell what it is. Okay? Right? Again, you're building anticipation. Okay? There's a dopamine hit here. You discovered the solution. Okay? But you don't tell them what it is. Builds anticipation. Then 8 is the kicker. Right? You describe how it feels to finally win. Describe feelings of reward. Okay. This releases the final brain chemical called serotonin. Serotonin is the chemical that's released in the brain when you experience a feeling of reward, right? Of relief and reward. Okay. Describe the feelings of reward. Right? This is where you introduce. You know how people say, imagine being able to this and imagine being able to that and living life like this. And this is, you're just in your story talking about, I was finally able to go on that vacation that I've always wanted to go on. I was finally able to, have the time to do this and that with my kids. I was finally able to do that, so you're describing the feelings of reward. And let me tell you something so in your story, you're saying, let me tell you, that made me feel so good. You're just describing the feeling there, right? So so that's serotonin. Serotonin is positive feelings of reward to the brain. And then because you felt that way, okay, you now want them to feel the same way. So here's the transition. You found the solution and you felt a certain way. Because you felt that way, you now want them. Did it go off or is it? It's still on. Okay. Because you felt that way, now you want them to experience those same feelings. So you've decided to create a method and make it simple for them, right? So you found a solution, positive feelings of reward, and then you talk about how you want them to feel the same way. So the 9 is the transition. You felt a certain way, you want them to feel that way, okay? And because you want them to feel that way, you've decided to make it simple for them and create a method that simplifies it and makes it really, really easy to understand, digest, and take action on. Make sense? I know I'm going through it, but so you've got cortisol, dopamine, oxytocin, the trust chemical, serotonin, the reward chemical, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the origin story. Right? Now, somebody turn your mic on and tell me how different that is from what you've been taught the origin story what should be. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll say I definitely felt that this is way different than how I've been telling my story, for sure. especially when you get down to where 6, 7, 8 is. Like, I'm not doing any of that, and I am definitely going to start doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful, man. This is where all your trust is built. This is where all, all your relatability is built. And it's an opportunity also in your origin story to throw rocks at your competitors. And who doesn't love doing that? Who doesn't
Nah,
love fun?
this is an eye opener. This is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out after I'm done after this tonight, and I'm going to go create a new story for my Facebook post tomorrow. This is outstanding. I'm excited.
You should, man. You should definitely. Let's see. Somebody's messaging me in the messenger. Let me pull this up. Yo, anybody got any questions so far about let's take a second and go through some of your guys' personal stories and kind of tell me how you see. I want a couple people to chime in here and tell me how you see your story fitting into this format right here. Anybody got something? Let's click back on.
I guess everybody's shy tonight. I guess I'll keep the
They're
floor.
like, I got to go figure it out first. They're like, I don't have my story nailed down like that. No problem, right? Like,
Yeah, no,
so,
I mean, as you were talking through it, I can already picture how I can put parts of my story into this, and just tell a better version of what I've been telling, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so it's like you're number one, like the failure, like I've never even thought of that, to start at the lowest point to hook them in.
Hooks their attention. If you start your story in the chaos, they're like, oh my gosh, what happened? That's the reaction that you get, and then they're hooked and they want to listen to what happened, right? Because that's also commonly used in a hypnotic technique that we call nested loops. So nested loop is when you start one story and then you cut it off and you skip to a completely different story, and then later on in your presentation you come back and close the story that you skipped out of in the beginning, right? So in nested loops do the same thing. They create tension, they build dopamine, and also they leave the audience hanging, cliffhangers, right? And what happens is when you start to tell a story, you bypass the conscious factor, right? And you go straight into speaking to the subconscious. Like people subconsciously, you ever watched a movie and you're so locked into the movie that something could happen in the house, or you're watching your favorite show,
Absolutely, all the time.
Something could happen in the house and you have no idea what happened. You completely tuned it out. You were tunnel vision on the show because you were feeding the subconscious, right? And that is why billions and billions of dollars a year is funneled into product placement in movies and shows, because subconsciously, when you see that product in a show, right, you may not think that you're focusing on it, but when you go out after that movie is over, after that show is over, the first thing when you see a product, you're like, oh, that was in the movie, right? So it's like the whole James Bond thing, right? Why do people, you watch James Bond, then you want to go out and buy an Omega watch because you walk by the Omega store, you see an Omega watch, and you're like, oh, that's the watch that James Bond had. Or what's another one? He drives what? Aston Martin, right? In every single movie. So people are like, oh, I want an Aston Martin because I want to be more like Bond, right? It's subtle stuff. It's subconscious, and most stories do that. They bypass the conscious factor, speak to the subconscious mind, and that is what we're going to get into in a minute. Right? How am I doing on time?
Around an hour and 20 minutes.
Are you guys getting bored with this, or should I keep going?
No, keep going.
Roll it. I got a question real quick before you go on there.
Yeah, go for it.
So not really, if I started, I wouldn't consider this a failure, but if I could start it with like a story, as in I for real spent nearly 40 grand on online business education when I got started. And then is that considered like something that would that hook them pretty good? And
okay,
like,
tell me the situation around that. How did you feel? What happened with that 40? What happened with the 40 grand?
It's gone now, but I felt great, because I left my job. I had been working in retail for close to 16 years, well, close to 20 years total between a couple different companies. And so I jumped, dove right in, cashed out my 401k, had a nice little nest egg. And the first company I came to, they just got me fired up for this. And like, I was ready to throw my money. Like, they did a very good job at pretty much what you're explaining here. And I wouldn't say I was a failure for doing that, but I guess my question is like, could that be considered a part, like a way to begin my story to hook people in? Like, hey, I spent nearly 40 grand trying to learn the right methods and
Here's what you want to do with that though. Did that 40 grand hurt you?
yeah. I just
In what way?
literally
In what way?
just sacrifice. Like I had to sell a bunch of stuff I didn't want to sell. Like I had
There you go.
to
So you start, but people get tied to items, right? They get tied to like heirlooms, or they get tied to things that they love, like a guitar or whatever. So let's say that you had to sell a guitar to get some money, right? Because you spent 40 grand. So that's the effect of it. But you start the story at the moment that you were having to sell that thing that you really didn't want to sell, right?
gotcha.
The feeling that I had walking into the pawn shop to sell my, guitar that I didn't want to, that I had for years and told myself I was never going to sell it. But there I was selling it and getting, way less than it was worth. But I had to do it because I was about to get evicted from my house or whatever, right? So if you open up there at the feeling that you had in having to sell the last thing that you didn't want to sell, okay, and then they're going to say, oh my gosh, what happened that you were in that position that you had to sell that thing that you didn't want to sell, right?
Gotcha.
So if you open up, it's not about the 40K as a part of your story, right? But the failure, you opening up with you at your lowest point, is how you felt. It is often the effect of the thing that happened, right? So the 40K is the cause, but the effect is what you had to do. You had to sell off all your shit. So you start your story with you selling off everything that you have to get money, and then you back up and you tell the reason why from the beginning in part 2.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I got you. Thanks
Yeah.
for clarifying that.
So you find one thing that you can talk about that really hurts you having to sell it. Okay. And you start your story with the moment that you open the door to the pawn shop to go in there with that thing to sell that thing. And then they're like, oh my gosh, why was he in that position?
Right on.
You know what I mean? So start with that and then back up from the beginning. And that hooks their attention because people relate to going broke and having to sell shit. Right?
Yeah, it sucks.
People relate to that. So when you start with that, they're like, oh, I've been there. I wonder what happened to him.
Cool. Good stuff, man.
Makes sense? Okay.
Yep.
So everybody got this? Because I'm going to erase it.
Let me get it. Sorry.
If you can even read my doctor's handwriting here.
That's the problem.
Somebody, I think Cliff always has a note taker that literally copies every word that I say. So everybody, if he's still on, everybody hit up Cliff for the text, because he literally like note takes every word that I say with AI. So all right. So I'll go a little bit more, and then we're gonna go to dinner and have a nice dinner. But I'll give you guys a little bit more before I go, because this is powerful and I love talking about this stuff. Anybody ever get into like subconscious reprogramming or hypnotherapy? Anybody ever have any interest or ever think to get into any of that stuff? Okay, so the basis of NLP is, it's neurolinguistic programming. Tony Robbins is big on it, right? If you get into books like Sleight of Mouth by Robert Dilts, if you get into, Richard Bandler stuff, going through all of, old school hypnotherapy, you've got, let's see, you've got the, my mind just went completely blank. Hold on. Yeah, it is. So the reason I say that, the reason I mention that anyways, is because what we're going to talk about now is the incorporation of hypnotic language patterns and subconscious selling into our stories and into our language and into our messaging, so that we can, number one, assist in creating that belief by speaking to the subconscious and bypassing that conscious factor, and also so that we can reframe objections. Okay, reframing is shifting focus away from one thing, like I said, onto the other, away from the objection and onto their desire. And we're going to talk about reframing with language patterns. That includes embedded commands, suggestions, etc. So an embedded command Huh? Yeah, exactly. So an embedded command tells people, let me just write this down. Embedded, oh, that's a command. Okay. Is a command that is slipped into your messaging. Okay. And I'm going to show you some examples of this in a second. Slipped into your messaging to speak directly to the subconscious, and an embedded command tells a person what to think, what to do, and how to feel. Okay. Now, suggestions give power to the embedded command and tie it all together and give it reason, right? So suggestion. In hypnosis, they're using this stuff obviously to overcome addiction, to overcome habits, to turn around suicides, that kind of stuff. I'm going to show you how to apply it to sales. So embedded commands, let's look at some examples of, actually, you know what? Let me go ahead. I'm going to share my screen. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to give you guys some actual examples so that you get this, because this is a very difficult part of, let's see. Let me just get into it. Boom, 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 boom. Bear with me 1 second. You're gonna like it. Okay, so. Well, let me go ahead and go to Zoom. Share screen. Host disabled participants. Oh, I made him the host and he's disabled my screen sharing.
I'll go ahead and get you posted.
Sweet. You got me?
Yep. You're good to go.
Says, all right, let me share screen. Okay. Now, let's get into it. Can y'all see this? Language patterns, embedded commands, suggestions, presuppositions, okay, causal links. Commands tell the reader, listener what to think, what to do, you know, or how to feel, what to feel, right? Suggestions tie those commands together. We just went over that. Now, here's an example, okay? Let's say that this is in my messaging in a sales presentation at the beginning of an ad, etc., right? If you are here today as an on this page, it is because you are interested in the idea of using Facebook groups to attract your ready to buy clients that will lead you to more money. Now, this is an example for somebody who's selling monetization of Facebook groups, but I want you to pay attention to the embedded commands and the suggestion in this. Okay, here it is. So what's in the green is what is picked up by the subconscious mind and speaks directly to the subconscious. The green is your embedded command. The blue is your suggestion. So remember, green is embedded command, blue is suggestion. If you are here today, right, as in on this page, it is because you. Now I want you to read just the green. If we read just the green, we get into you are interested in using Facebook groups. So today you are interested in using Facebook groups to attract your ready to buy clients. Now, if I just told you that, if I said, you know what, today you're going to be interested in using a Facebook group to get clients, you can object to that statement. You can object to me making the statement, but you will not object to the embedded command if it is embedded properly, you know, into what we call a language pattern. Okay. Today, you are interested in using Facebook groups. That is what slips past the conscious mind to the subconscious. And why? Because that will lead you to more money. Blue is the suggestion. It ties it gives a reason to the embedded command. I know this is getting a little confusing, but let me just break down another one for you. So another example, I believe the real reason that you're here is because you understand how important investing in yourself truly is. Not always in dollars, but investing your time and seeking this knowledge. That's going to help you overcome the obstacles, relieve the stress, and pre-solve the problems that come with starting or scaling a massive real estate portfolio. So this is a real estate example, okay? The green speaks to the subconscious, okay? So the suggestion, the real reason why you're here, I'm suggesting, is investing in yourself truly is always in dollars, okay? And I know there's a knot in there, right? There's a knot that's in there. And I'm going to talk to you about what that not is in a second. Hold on, I'm checking the chat.
Bill's coming
Um,
right now.
Yeah. That not is what is called a negation. And we're going to go through negations in a second. It's a technique of lowering their guard. Okay. Keep in mind that a negation or a negative, a not, can't, won't, don't, is not picked up by the subconscious mind, right? And I'll explain why in a second, but bear with me here. So the embedded command is investing in yourself truly is always in dollars. Investing your time in seeking this knowledge is going to help you start scaling a massive real estate portfolio, okay? And that's the real reason why you're here, is a suggestion. Now you see what I did there? All of the other words in between that are there to mask the embedded command, right? But I believe the real reason why you're here is because you understand how important investing in yourself truly is, right? But the embedded command is investing in yourself truly is always in dollars. I want the subconscious mind to believe that, right? That investing in yourself is in dollars. Now, here's what I did, okay? Okay, I'm going to give you another example. Huh? Oh, hold on. Participants. Who's in? I don't see where it's saying, huh? Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm looking at participants. I don't see Billy.
He may or may not should jump in.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I don't see him. All right. So I'm going to go through another example. I'm going to unload everything I know about the creation of belief with story. When I get to the end, if and only if you see that this is truly eye-opening for you and you've learned something, believe it's capable of making you tons of cash. Now, if I skip, if I read the green, the subconscious mind is picking up when I get to the end. See that this is truly eye-opening for you. I'm telling you what to think, what to feel, and what to do. See that this is eye-opening for you. You've learned something. Believe it's capable of making you tons of cash. You see what I did there, right? Words like if and only if, are thrown in there to lower resistance, obviously, the conscious mind, and speak to this up, and so that the embedded command can be landed. Okay. Then the suggestion is you should deeply consider the very special offer that I put together. Okay. Now, let's go through some of this. So let's address a few other things that are happening here. Presupposition categories. How many of you have heard people say all the time, powerfully, naturally, easily, quickly, effortlessly, right? They're using those words. Those words are called presuppositions. They're adverb adjective presuppositions. Then you have presuppositions of time, words like as, while, before, after, now, today, until. You're presupposing, if you say as, you're presupposing that it's happening now, that's present. If you're saying while, that's present. Okay, before, that's past, after, that's future, now, today, and until is future. So until is a future presupposition. You're presupposing that it's going to happen at some point, right? The awareness presuppositions are recognize, realize, discover, become aware, imagine. Everybody says, imagine this, imagine that, right? Imagine being able to this, okay? You are telling the brain, or you're telling the subconscious to now picture this. I'm trying to paint a picture with those words, right? You begin painting a picture of what you want them to see, imagine, or believe. Okay, so let's go to next. Now let's add the superpower words and phrases. Negations. Remember, I used not earlier. So negations like don't, not, or no cannot be processed by the subconscious mind without first receiving the command. Okay, now let me explain that. If I say don't think about the Statue of Liberty, your brain has to first relate those words to the image and think about a statue before you can tell yourself not to. So if you know what the Statue of Liberty is, and I say, don't think about the Statue of Liberty, you have to think about it, picture it in your mind first, and then say, oh, I'm not supposed to think about that. But what happens is in language patterns, we use negations so smooth and so quick that it locks the idea into the subconscious mind. And before your conscious has the ability to talk yourself out of that thing or to tell yourself not to do it, you've already moved on to the next phase of the language pattern. So by saying, again, don't think about the Statue of Liberty, you think about it first, right? So your brain does catch it. So by that time, like I said, it's too late. The not lowers resistance and the commands slip in. So here's another example of using a negation effectively. I would not expect you to even consider this until you've become absolutely certain of the fact that these 12 stories used properly can and will sell anything. Okay. If we read the green, we get the embedded command. I expect you to consider. Okay. You're telling the subconscious mind, I expect you to consider the fact that these 12 stories used properly can and will sell anything, right? The fact, when you say the fact that is actually a suggestion or a presupposition, you are presupposing that what you are about to say to them or what you're saying to them is a fact. You're presupposing that it's a fact, okay? I would not expect you to even consider it becomes I expect you to consider the fact that these 12 stories used properly can and will sell anything. You see how covert that is, right? You're saying I would not expect, so you're lowering sales resistance. I would not expect you to even consider it until you were absolutely certain of the fact that these 12 stories used properly can and will sell anything. And this gets tricky, guys, because so many people use these wrong, okay? Now, you have to be careful with negations. They can work against you. A negation must always, always, always be tied to a positive when you use them, right? So here's examples of the wrong way to use negations. I don't think you're a failure. How many times have you said that to somebody? Or how about I don't want to waste your time? How many times have you said, I don't want to waste your time? Well, what happens is the negation in hypnosis, they call it a deletion, right? So in the actual practice of hypnosis or hypnotic therapy, they call this a deletion, right? The red word is a deletion. It's a negation. It does not get picked up by the subconscious. So if I say, I don't want to waste your time, I'm telling you, I want to waste your time, right? That's horrible. Don't get angry. Get angry. I don't think you're a failure. Subconscious sees, I think you're a failure, right? Because when you say, I don't think you're a failure, they're like, am I a failure? Right? They start thinking about it. This is what you don't want to do, right? You do not want to tie a negation to a negative, okay? Because it will embed the opposite, right? So instead of saying, I don't want to waste your time, you want to change that completely. You don't have to use a negation there. It can be a positive entirely. And you can say, I want to make sure that the time we spend together is most valuable. Okay, if you say, I want to make sure that the time we're spending together is most valuable to both of us, right? That is better than saying, I don't want to waste your time because I'm not going to feed your subconscious with the wrong command. If I give you a negative command, I now have to use in hypnosis what's called a confusion pattern, right? And you can break up. So when you start stacking commands, so the idea here is that this concept, I'm using these examples in the form of phrases so that you understand them, but the concept of embedded commands and suggestion when stacked into these stories. Now imagine you have these 12 stories, and remember I talked about third person validation and using dialogue, right? If I say, if I say that I met with this person and this person said to me, I would not expect you to believe this, and blah, blah, blah. I'm using third person validation. I'm saying somebody else said something, but I'm incorporating dialogue into my story, and I slip the embedded command into the story that I'm telling, so that by the time they get through listening to the story and hearing the story, you have programmed their subconscious mind, right? So that's the ultimate goal, is to understand the idea of these embedded commands and understand the idea of these suggestions, right? So that you can slip them into all the stories. Once all of these embedded commands and suggestions are slipped into the story, right, then by the end of your story, you have subconsciously reprogrammed that person, right? And this happens all the time. You can watch anybody who's good at speaking on stage. When you're at a conference, you listen to somebody speak, you're like, man, that speaker crushed it. It's because their stories contain embedded commands, contain suggestion. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So the next time you're listening to somebody talk, you're going to be like, oh, I see what he did there. He used an identity frame. He used embedded commands. He's using suggestion. Like it's all over, sprinkled throughout every story, right? So, but like I said, negations, you don't want to tie a negation to a negative. You want to always switch your phrasing, your words up to be a positive thing, right? So negations are often used in a technique we call the false profession of ignorance. What is false profession of ignorance? It's basically you playing dumb, right? To lower sales resistance, okay? You're saying, I don't know, I can't tell, I can't say, I can't be the one. You ever heard somebody say, I can't be the one to tell you, and then they tell you what they're going to tell you, right? I can't be the one to tell you this, but I'm going to tell it to you, right? That's called a false profession of ignorance. It is a negation technique, okay? I can't be one to tell you that this is exactly what you need, You have to discover yourself that everyone else is doing it before you decide today to take action. Now, here's what's happening. Embedded command. Woo, imagine that. This is exactly what you need, is what's embedded. Everyone else is doing it. Decide today to take action. Okay. I used a negation technique called the false profession of ignorance. And I said, I can't be the one to tell you. I guarantee you, you get on your sales calls and you start saying stuff like this. Okay. They're going to pick up exactly what you told them after you said, I can't be the one to tell you. Right. There's different ways of doing this. Like, don't blame me for this, but right. I can't be the one to tell you that this is exactly what you need. You have to discover yourself that everyone else is doing it and decide today to take action. Okay. Again, the green embedded commands, super, super, super powerful stuff, right? If you throw this into the dialogue of a story, okay, what the subconscious picks up is this is exactly what you need. Everyone else is doing it. Decide to take action. Okay. Now discover yourself. Okay. You see that discover yourself there? Again, goes back to the presuppositions. Okay. Discover. You're telling the brain to now imagine this, to think about this, to discover, to go search for it. Right? Discover this or focus on this because everyone else is doing it. Right? Now, here is another example. Find yourself, discover yourself, convince yourself, allow yourself. These are trance phrases. When you hear somebody in a hypnosis session, they always say, now, if you would take a moment to find yourself or convince yourself or allow yourself, discover yourself doing this or doing that, right? They are trance phrases. They are powerful. And here's an example. If you would allow yourself to make this commitment, then together we take instant action and you'll find yourself living the life you've been manifesting. Embedded command, allow yourself to make this commitment. Take instant action. You'll soon find yourself living the life that you've been manifesting. Now, together we is another technique used often. It is called implied relationship. Okay. Anytime you say together, we're going to do this. Notice I went from you, allow yourself, and together. If I put it all on you and I say, you're going to have to do this, you're going to have to do that, you're going to have to do this. You're like, man, that's a lot of stuff for me to do. But if I say, allow yourself, and then together's implied relationship, I'm going to do it with you. So anytime you use words like we or together, you're implying relationship, right? Which is back to a basic human need, right? Relationship is basic human need based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Makes sense? So all this comes full circle when you start incorporating it all together. As you can tell from the previous statement, these techniques are not only used in pre-framing, they are used in reframing and closing as well, right? I wanted to give you the foundation of commands and suggestions. There's so much more on top of that. Let's see where this goes. Okay. Okay. So I'm getting into something different there. So I just wanted to screen share that part. How many of you got some value out of that? I know I kind of went through it kind of quick, but how many of you got value from that?
Most definitely. Lots of value.
Value.
Lots of it there. So
I've heard this like 3 times.
go ahead.
Love it.
Somebody was talking. I think I cut somebody off. No, it's okay. So again, I was showing you examples of this in the form of statements, but when you incorporate, right? When you incorporate all of this into story, okay, then you start to see massive results because not only are you selling them with the story and the contextual validation and they're believing in the cause, they're believing in the, in the person, they're believing in the process, they're believing in the offer, they're believing in all that because of the story. You are also telling the subconscious mind exactly what to think, exactly what to do, when to take action, why to take action, and how to do it. Right? And you're doing it covertly. You're doing it covertly with embedded commands. You're doing it with suggestion and negations and all that, but you're masking. So as if it wasn't masked enough already, like the statements, I would not expect you to this and that without boom, embedded command, right? As if that wasn't covert enough. You are then telling it in a story which completely hides your intention, right? So when you have those embedded commands and suggestions stacked into story, you completely mask or hide your intention so that people are so involved in the story that they're receiving the commands without even knowing that they're receiving the commands. And it's so powerful, right? It is hands down what has transformed my sales. When I started getting into this, what happened was I read a book called Sleight of Mouth by Robert Dilts, and it talks about the creation of belief. And Eric's got it. I told him to get it. But basically, I got into that, and that led me down this rabbit hole of discovering how to create belief. And I started studying some of the books, right, that were most influential in history on the creation of belief, right? What books were greater at creating belief than the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, all those books? And then what I discovered was crazy is that all 12 of these stories that I teach in the Story Tower were found in all of those books. And the massive amount of embedded commands and suggestions that are in those books, those religious books, are insane. If you go back and you look now, right, you and just take a freaking highlighter, right? Take a highlighter and highlight the stories and highlight, like, you know, the embedded commands and the suggestion and everything that's in there. You're like, this is one crazy book with a bunch of chapters, and it is completely, you know, built on persuasion principles and built on hypnotic principles and all of that. So the name of that book, Phil, is Sleight of Mouth by Robert Dilts. It is a difficult read. I will tell you this. It is a difficult read because it is meant for people who are studying neuroscience and studying, you know, hypnosis and psychology, and it is a difficult read. This is the book right here, right? But it is a good book. When I skim books like this, I skim through books and I start learning how to, or thinking of ways to apply, right, these books, reframing, content reframing, context reframing. This is basically a book of how to create belief and handle objections, right? That's what it is, hands down, right? But it is taught from the perspective of hypnotherapy or of hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming. So when you take this book and you start applying it to sales, it changes everything. It changes your thought patterns. And when you change your thought patterns, that RAS, your reticular activating system, again, starts looking for different things. And when you start getting into, you know, hypnotic language patterns, okay, and you start getting into story and incorporating it, like, it just, I cannot tell you the difference that it makes. Okay, it's one thing to learn how to tell a story, but when you learn how to tell a story and speak to the subconscious mind at the same time, you start moving masses of people. Okay, you start moving masses of people and you start to create that movement or that cause, right, that I was telling you about. So again, you can try this in short form. You can use some of these phrases. I would not expect you to, that kind of stuff. You can use that in your short form content on your TikToks, whatever, and just look at the difference that it makes. Like, just watch the difference that it makes in people, because you're lowering sales resistance. Okay, instead of saying take action now, be like, listen, I would not expect you to take action on this until you become certain of the fact that this is boom, 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 boom for you, right? Desire, 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 desire. Okay, it just works, right? So try it, come back, let me know what you think about it. I'll tell you what, guys, it is 8:48. I went about 48 minutes over what I thought I was going to, because I was only going to do an hour. So I am going to cut it off right here. But I kind of feel like I'm leaving you hanging, because there's so much more, you know, to get into here. And Eric is actually, you know, I told him that he has an upcoming challenge, right? And this challenge is going to be crazy, 5 days of intense stuff. He's given the fire, and it's super dope. And you know, I wanted to invite everybody here to that challenge. If you're not going to be in that challenge, I know some of you are going to be on that challenge, but I can't tell you now, but may or may not be talking about some of this, some more of the story stuff in the challenge. You know, it should be fun. We'll see. But yeah, there's the link to the challenge. If you guys want to hop in, go ahead and join that challenge. It's only a damn $1. And we have been putting some massive work in this week. We've been shooting ads. We've been working on challenge slides. We've been doing all kind of stuff. And we've put massive work into this challenge. So it is going to be epic. And I definitely recommend that you guys hop into this if you are trying to build your business for the first time, or if you are trying to scale your online business to the next level. Again, some of this stuff really makes a difference. So I'm going to hop off, guys. Make sure that if you have not joined the challenge, it's $1. Join the challenge, and I will be in there. So I will see you on the challenge in there. I'll be chatting it up. So appreciate you guys. Real quick before I go, anybody have any last minute questions on any of this stuff?
Jeremy, I don't have any questions other than I dropped in a little later and I feel like I dropped into a psychological economical marketing assassins class. You know, this is super awesome. Thank you for being here on a Friday night and going over all of this with us. I just can't thank you enough, and thank Eric. I mean, this is absolute gold here. I mean, just dropping into a class like this and taking 6 pages of notes, and it's just fabulous. I just want to say thank you. And man, you got me fired up. I just thank you so much. And again, I apologize for not knowing your story, but I definitely feel like I'm talking to a doctorate of some sort or a professor or something, because you do really well. So thank you.
I will tell you this, because Eric's he's right here too. But without this stuff that I taught you today, right? With one story, with an origin story and a webinar, I made $1 million. So I made 7 figures without this stuff. Okay. Now,
Wow.
when I incorporated the rest of this, when I incorporated story and I started to master story and I got into subconscious reprogramming and all this other stuff, right? I quickly, I went from 1 to 26 mil faster than I went from 0 to 1 mil.
Oh my.
Right.
Excellent.
So I went from 1 to 26 faster than I went from 0 to 1, because this stuff made the difference, right? The ability to tell stories, to speak to the subconscious. And yeah, I've been working with Eric. Great dude here. Like I said,
Yes, 100%. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you.
If you wonder where I've been learning
if you're
wondering where I learned my stuff from and all this stuff, when you guys go through the challenge slides, if you go back to them again, you're going to see all these embedded commands already, but they're going to be even more. So when you guys go through the slides, you can be able to pick them out. So I owe a lot all to this man right here. So
yeah, so now when you go through the challenge, you'll be like, oh, I see what he did, right? So it's not going to work. Thankfully, we don't have a huge audience on here right now.
but yeah, I've done a lot of my stuff with this man right
I
here.
wouldn't be able to sell nobody. I'd be like, oh, I saw all those embedded commands that you're trying to get me with, you know?
That's how I got in here.
Yeah, but you'll see all that stuff. For sure. All right, guys, I'm going to hop off, right? Thank you for joining.
Jeremy, appreciate you, brother.
Thank you,
Great show.
Jeremy.
Loved it.
Yeah, I'm
Thanks-
gonna
thanks
post
for the
this. I'm gonna
time.
post this up on my page.
Appreciate
So
it.
the recording will be posted up on my page, so that you guys can go back and watch it. You know, for those of you who
Awesome.
missed a little bit. So, woo, let's go.
Thank you, brother.
All right, guys, I'm off.
Good night,
Thanks.
y'all.
Great
Right.
weekend.